Hey friends, we are near the end of our look at the passage in Colossians 3, and today we're talking about forgiveness. I think forgiveness is probably one of the hardest things that the Lord calls us to do. I know for me in my life, there have been many times where I have been wounded, offended, hurt, violated by people, and it's hard to forgive, especially when they do not ask for your forgiveness. But our passage today talks about making allowance for others' faults and forgiving them, anyone who offends you. It's really interesting to me that they use the word offend. That's something that I think we can relate to a lot in our society. There's this easily offendable nature that we have. But here it says to forgive anyone who offends you, remembering that the Lord forgave you and therefore you must forgive others. Again, we see it's a command. Not you should, not it would be nice if you did, not it's better if you do, but you must forgive others. This idea of the importance of forgiveness because we have been forgiven, we see throughout Scripture. Specifically in Matthew 18, Jesus tells this parable. Setting it up, Peter comes to him and he says, Lord, how many times do I have to forgive my brother and sister who have offended me? Is 7 times enough? And you can kind of tell from the text that he's thinking, here I am being generous, like I'm an incredibly forgiving person. And Jesus comes back to him and he says, well, how about 70 times 7? Think about the magnitude of that. Here Peter was trying to figure out what is the bare minimum that I have to do, and Jesus is saying you have to forgive extravagantly. So the story, the parable that he goes on to explain, talks about a master and a servant. The master is settling up debts. He calls the servant to him and says, you owe me a massive amount of money. Because you owe me that, I'm gonna put you and your family as slaves. I'm gonna indenture you. And the servant comes before him and he gets down on his knees and he's begging and he's saying, Lord, Master, give me more time. I will pay you back every single penny, but give me more time. And so the master has compassion on him. And not only does he say, you don't have to pay back, but he sends him on his way. So he meets him with mercy and forgiveness. Now, that servant, having just been forgiven, goes out, finds another servant who owes him a much smaller amount of money and is met with the very same response. So, please forgive me, give me time, I will pay it back. But instead of meeting that servant with the very same mercy and forgiveness that he received, he instead throws him in jail. Well, the other servants were fit to be tied. They wanted nothing to do with this. And so they go to the master and they say, you would not believe it. But the servant just turned around and did not forgive this other servant. Once the master heard it, he called the servant to him and he said, don't you think you should have given him mercy the same way that I gave you mercy? Then he punished that servant. That servant had to endure the punishment that he was originally going to. So here we see that the servant went out and immediately forgot the grace that he had been given. I think about how easy that is for us too. We forget that we too are sinners that have been forgiven of so much, not just by God, but from our fellow brothers and sisters as well. And we have the tendency to harbor unforgiveness in our heart, making excuses, saying that, well, they don't deserve it. Well, they didn't ask for forgiveness. Well, I'm still wounded by it. Many, many different excuses. And I'm not going to say that those excuses aren't valid because I know forgiveness is hard. And there are some very deep wounds that take time to forgive. But nevertheless, it is a command from the Lord that we forgive others. And it begins with humility, with that understanding that we talked about of our own depravity, of our need for grace and forgiveness from the Lord. Then we move on to the patience that we talked about last week, being patient with others, making allowance or bearing with their faults. And then finally, we move on to that step of forgiveness, recognizing that also when we forgive, we are released from the burden of the resentment and the bitterness that unforgiveness often settles in our heart. So, today, as we go out upon our week and we think about what it looks like to forgive like Jesus forgave, and what that means in a practical way for us, I would love if we would just take some time to just truly ponder, what unforgiveness do we have in our heart? What are the things that we are making excuses about and unwilling to let go? And what can we do? What can be some practical steps that we do today to let that go, to release it, and to truly forgive others? Well, I hope you guys are having a good week, and I will see you on Sunday.